They laughed at her. A black cleaning lady, invisible to them in the building. But what they didn't know was that Portia Williams wasn't just cleaning, she was waiting for the moment she would take them by surprise. Watch to the end to see how she flipped everything upside down. Before we dive into Portia's incredible journey, let us know where you're watching from. In the comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story of resilience, power, and taking control of your destiny speaks to you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more stories that show how one person can change everything. Portia stepped into the gleaming lobby of Hamilton Industries, a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. Her dark skin and natural curls framed her face, radiating a quiet confidence beneath the surface of her calm demeanor. Dressed in the plain blue uniform of the cleaning staff, her ID badge clipped at her side, Portia's sharp, observant eyes scanned her surroundings. To anyone glancing her way, she was just another invisible worker, easily overlooked by the fast-paced executives bustling by in their tailored suits. The lobby, a symbol of power and corporate success, boasted marble floors polished to perfection, reflecting the soft, golden light from a chandelier that hung overhead. The walls were adorned with sleek modern art and framed photographs celebrating the company's milestones, just like the ones Portia had seen in the magazines during her childhood. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. This was the empire she had once admired from a distance, but today, she was here for something far greater than admiration. Today she would experience it from the ground up, where few would ever expect someone like her to be, especially not in this capacity. As Portia made her way to the janitor's closet to gather her supplies, she noticed the hierarchy in action. Lower-level employees moved quickly, heads down, eager to please and to remain unseen. Meanwhile, the executives walked with an air of untouchable authority, barely acknowledging anyone outside their circle. She exchanged polite nods with a few staff members who offered brief, somewhat dismissive smiles before hurrying back to their work. Most didn't even notice her, and that, she knew, was just fine. In fact, it was perfect. When Portia reached the closet, she stopped for a moment, her full lips curling into a secretive smile. This was the moment she had planned for months, no, years. What no one knew was that she had quietly and strategically acquired the majority shares of Hamilton Industries. Avoiding any public attention, she had played her hand with precision. Today she wasn't here as a mere cleaner. She was here to understand her company from the perspective of those who kept it running, the people often overlooked, just like she had been. Her rise had been anything but typical. Raised by her mother, a woman who had worked 2 jobs cleaning houses and offices much like this one, Portia had learned early that the world often saw black women as expendable, invisible labor. But her mother had also taught her that strength came from understanding your worth, even when others didn't. Portia had taken those lessons to heart, pushing herself through college and business school, mastering the rules of a system that wasn't built for her, all while keeping one goal in mind: control her destiny. Today, that destiny was in her hands. Grabbing a rag and spray bottle, Portia wheeled her cart down the hallway toward the elevators. As she passed through the bustling corridors, she overheard snippets of conversation about deadlines, meetings, and the usual office politics. But there were also whispers, the ones that made her heart tighten, the rumors about the new cleaning lady. "Did you see the new janitor?" a young receptionist whispered to her colleague as Portia passed by. "I don't think I've seen her before." The colleague shrugged, her tone dripping with casual condescension. "She'll probably be gone in a week. You know how these executives treat the help. They barely see them." "Yeah," the receptionist agreed, her voice hushed. "It's like they're invisible or something." Portia's grip on the cart tightened slightly, but her face remained composed. Invisible, she thought. Exactly what I'm counting on. She rode the elevator to the top floor, where the executive offices overlooked the rest of the building. She had always known that power didn't just sit in the numbers on a spreadsheet or in the titles on office doors. Real power came from understanding the game from every angle, especially from the bottom, where people were too often written off. Today she would get an intimate view of how this place ran, how they thought they could dismiss her, just as they had dismissed so many others. As the doors opened, Portia stepped into the world of polished suits and crisp ties. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, she could see the leadership team of Hamilton Industries seated around a grand table. There they were, the so-called masters of the universe who believed their successes had been earned through nothing but their own hard work. Portia studied their faces. These were men who had no idea how precarious their control really was. At the head of the table sat Nathan Pierce, the CEO. His silver hair was swept back neatly, and he wore an expensive navy suit that seemed to scream dominance. His smile was the type that conveyed confidence, maybe even a bit of arrogance. Around him were his trusted lieutenants, James, the CFO, who had a reputation for cutting costs without a second thought for the people behind the numbers, Richard, the head of marketing, the smooth talker who spun grand stories about the company's success, and Oliver, the operations manager, known for his no-nonsense, sometimes abrasive approach to efficiency. Together, they were the self-anointed architects of Hamilton's success, or so they thought. As Portia moved closer to the boardroom, she overheard their conversation. They were laughing about a recent merger and the hefty bonuses they were expecting. "Hard work pays off, doesn't it?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table with a satisfied grin. James chuckled, lifting his glass. "More like smart work. We know how to play the game." Richard leaned back in his chair, a smirk on his face. "Yeah, smart work. It's not like that janitor downstairs. Imagine her looking at us in our suits, knowing this is as close as she'll ever get." Oliver's voice oozed disdain. "Some people are just born to scrub floors and clean up after the rest of us. Life's not fair." Their laughter rang out, loud and self-assured. To them, Portia was nothing more than the help, an invisible part of the office scenery. They had no idea that the woman they were laughing at was the one who now controlled their futures. Portia's face remained calm, her hands steady as she wiped the windows outside the boardroom. But inside, she was filing away every word, every insult, every moment of their arrogance. These men thought they had built an empire on their brilliance alone, but in truth, they had built it on the backs of people like her mother, people who had worked themselves to the bone with no recognition. Today, Portia was here to take her rightful place. Later that afternoon, Portia continued her rounds as the building hummed with the usual activity. She had been here for weeks now, and each day had brought new insights, new understanding, the meetings, the decisions, the way the building seemed to pulse with life and purpose. None of it was an accident. She was beginning to see the cracks, the places where power leaked through, unnoticed by those who thought they held all the cards. And soon, they would see that Portia Williams was no longer a face in the crowd, no longer someone to be underestimated. She passed by the elevators where a small group of interns huddled together, whispering anxiously. Portia slowed her pace, her gaze moving over the group, noticing the stress etched into their faces. Interns, she knew, were often the most vulnerable in the corporate world. They worked long hours with little pay, their futures uncertain, their careers in the hands of powerful, unyielding figures like Nathan Pierce and his cronies. One of the interns, a young black woman with tight braids, caught Portia's eye. The intern's expression softened, and she nodded respectfully, as if she understood the quiet weight Portia carried. There was a knowing in her eyes, a shared experience of being seen, but never truly seen. "Don't let them get to you," the intern said softly, glancing over her shoulder as the others laughed nervously at something the CFO had said in passing. "They act like they run the world, but they don't know everything." Portia smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm, grounding. Sometimes the ones who think they know everything are the ones with the most to learn. As she walked away, Portia couldn't help but think of her own journey. When she was an intern, fresh out of Spelman College, she had been so eager to prove herself, so determined to make her mark in a world that seemed built to keep her out. But now, with years of planning and patience under her belt, she had the power to rewrite the rules. It wasn't just about getting a seat at the table, it was about owning the damn table. The crisp air of Atlanta was starting to creep in through the building's ventilation system as evening approached. Portia adjusted her uniform as she moved past the grand staircase that led up to the executive floors. She glanced out the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching a glimpse of the plush homes in Buckhead, the wealthiest neighborhood in Atlanta. From here, they looked like a world apart. But it wasn't the opulence that caught Portia's attention. It was the sheer distance between the lives of the people inside Hamilton Industries and those who built this city. Buckhead was the kind of place where the elite rubbed elbows, where deals were brokered in private rooms and in expensive restaurants, with no regard for the everyday people who made their wealth possible. Portia knew those streets well. She knew the mansions with their manicured lawns, the gated communities, the big houses that kept their inhabitants safe from the realities of the world outside. But what they didn't know, what they would never know, was the power of the people they chose to ignore. She shook her head, refocusing on her task as she reached the top floor. The moment of contemplation passed, replaced by the pulse of ambition that had never once slowed in her chest. Today was not the day for subtlety. It was time to make her presence known. As Portia entered the elevator, she took a steady breath. The soft music playing in the background did nothing to ease the tension inside her. The moment she stepped into that boardroom, there would be no turning back. She had planned for this. For years she had studied, observed, and waited. The time had come for her to reclaim what was rightfully hers. When the elevator doors slid open, Portia took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The boardroom door was slightly ajar, and she paused just outside, listening. Inside, she could hear their voices, familiar voices. They were discussing the merger again, laughing about how easily they had manipulated the deal to line their pockets. It was the same conversation, the same arrogance, and the same disregard for the people who kept their world spinning. She pushed the door open slowly, deliberately. The room fell silent. No one turned to look at her immediately. Nathan Pierce, who was sitting at the head of the table, flicked his eyes up but quickly returned to his notes. He clearly didn't see her as a threat. Not yet. The others remained engrossed in their own conversations, assuming that Portia would do what she always did, clean the windows, empty the trash, and leave. But Portia didn't move toward the windows. She didn't go to the trash bins. She stood there, calmly at the threshold, until Nathan finally looked up at her, brow furrowed in irritation. "What is it?" he asked, his voice clipped and dismissive. "You're not here to clean, are you?" Portia's gaze locked onto his, unwavering. "Actually, Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice cool and composed, "I'm here for the meeting." The room went dead silent. Nathan blinked, clearly confused. He looked around at the others, who were now beginning to sense that something wasn't right. Portia stepped forward, her heels echoing in the silence as she walked toward the center of the table. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to handle this. "What meeting?" Nathan asked, still skeptical. Portia smiled inwardly. This was it. The moment had finally arrived. "The meeting," she said, pulling out a folded piece of paper from her pocket and laying it down gently in front of Nathan. "The meeting where I inform you that, as of this morning, I am the majority shareholder of Hamilton Industries." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Nathan's face drained of color. His hand trembled as he reached for the paper, his eyes scanning the document as if looking for some kind of mistake. This is impossible," he stammered. "How did you?" Portia crossed her arms, her chin held high. "While you were busy laughing at people like me, I was making moves quietly, strategically, and now I hold the controlling shares of this company." Richard, the head of marketing, leaned forward, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This has to be some kind of joke," he muttered. "You can't just—" "Oh, but I can," Portia interrupted smoothly. "For too long, you've led this company with arrogance and a complete disregard for the people who actually make it run. But today, all of that changes." The room was frozen. The power they thought they had was slipping away, and they had no idea how to stop it. "Today," Portia continued, "Hamilton Industries belongs to me." She let the silence settle for a moment before smiling a slow, deliberate curve of her lips. This was her moment. The future had already been decided, and she was holding the pen. The room remained silent, the weight of Portia's words hanging heavy in the air. Nathan Pierce, the CEO, was still holding the paper as though it were some kind of forgery, his eyes scanning it again and again, looking for a loophole, a mistake, anything that could prove her wrong. But there was no mistake, no loophole. Portia stood in the center of the room, her posture perfect, her presence undeniable. She had known the moment would come when she would reveal herself, but there was no thrill in the unveiling. To her, it was simply a matter of course, the next logical step in a plan that had been years in the making. Richard, the marketing head, was the first to speak. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his fear. "You can't just take over like this. There's there's legal protocol. There are regulations. You have no experience in this kind of experience. Portia cut him off, her tone smooth but firm. You want to talk about experience? Tell me, Richard, how many years of experience does it take to exploit the labor of people like my mother? How many years of experience does it take to ignore the very people who build your company? Her words struck him like a physical blow. Richard flinched but didn't have an answer. Nathan, still holding the paper, stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't possible," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "You're a janitor. You're nothing in this company." Portia's gaze never wavered as she met his eyes. "That's where you're wrong, Nathan. I'm everything. I'm the reason your marble floors are spotless. I'm the reason you have someone to clean up after you. I'm the reason your business runs smoothly on the back of hard work and overlooked people." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. James, the CFO, was the next to speak, his voice laced with irritation, but also fear. "What do you want from us, Portia? A seat at the table? You already have the shares. What more do you need?" Portia smiled. "I'm not interested in a seat at your table, James. I'm interested in owning the table." She glanced at each of them in turn, Nathan, Richard, James, and Oliver, and her smile widened, not in amusement, but in the satisfaction of knowing she held all the cards. "You think you can run this company? You're out of your depth," Oliver said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "What do you know about corporate strategy? What do you know about growing Hamilton's bottom line?" Portia's expression hardened, her eyes cutting through him like a blade. "I know that this company has been built on the backs of people like me, people you never bothered to consider. But now, I'm going to build it into something that will actually work for everyone, not just for you and your fancy bonuses." She paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to settle in. Nathan Pierce, who had always exuded such arrogance, now looked like a man on the edge of panic. His grip on the paper loosened as he glanced at his colleagues for reassurance, but there was no comfort to be found in their faces. They were all trapped in a game they hadn't even realized they were losing. Portia stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. She was no longer just a figure in the background. She was the storm in their calm. "From this moment forward, things will change," she said, her voice cold and calculated. "I will be making the decisions from here on out. Nathan, I suggest you start making peace with that fact." For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, the kind of silence that precedes a major shift, the kind that comes right before everything falls apart. "Does anyone else have anything to say?" Portia asked, her tone almost casual, though the force behind her words made it clear that any resistance was futile. Nathan looked from one executive to another, but none of them spoke. They were all too afraid now. The reality of their situation was settling in. Portia wasn't just a cleaner anymore. She was their boss. She owned Hamilton Industries, and there was nothing they could do about it. Finally, Portia spoke again, her voice calm but resolute. "You've all been living in a bubble, thinking that you control everything. But in reality, the ones who have power are the ones who understand how the game is played. And I'm not here to play by your rules. I'm here to change them." The room was still, but Portia could feel the shift in the air. She could feel the uncertainty radiating from the men who had once thought themselves untouchable. They were beginning to realize the truth. The system that had worked for them, at least, for a while, was now crumbling at their feet. James, the CFO, seemed to be the first to come to terms with the new reality. He cleared his throat and sat up straighter. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice losing some of its earlier defiance. "What's your first move?" Portia turned to him, a slight smirk tugging at her lips. "Now," she said, "I make sure that the people who built this company, people like my mother, and people like the janitors, the secretaries, the cleaners, are paid what they're worth. I make sure they have the power and the respect they deserve. From now on, Hamilton Industries is going to be a company that values its people, not just its profits." There was a beat of stunned silence, followed by the soft sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Portia turned to see one of the interns from earlier, a young black woman standing just outside the door of the boardroom. She was watching the scene unfold, a look of awe on her face. "You're going to change everything, aren't you?" the intern asked quietly, her voice filled with admiration. Portia smiled at her, the first genuine smile she'd offered in years. "Yes," Portia said, her voice full of promise. "And this is just the beginning." The boardroom felt different now. Portia could sense the shift in energy as the executives, who had once walked with their heads held high, were now hesitant, uncertain of the future. The silence stretched out longer than anyone was comfortable with. No one dared to speak, each of them waiting for Portia to make the next move. But Portia wasn't in a hurry. She had waited too long for this moment to rush it. Nathan Pierce, still standing at the head of the table, seemed to snap out of his daze first. He cleared his throat, his expression strained as he tried to regain some semblance of control. This isn't how this is supposed to happen," he muttered under his breath. "You can't just waltz in here and take over, Portia." Portia tilted her head slightly, watching him with calm, unblinking eyes. "Waltz in here?" she echoed, her voice smooth, almost bored. "Nathan, I didn't waltz in here. I've been here for months, watching you, studying you, learning how you run things. But now, it's my turn." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to step up and dispute them. Nathan opened his mouth, but Portia didn't give him a chance to speak. Instead, she turned her gaze toward James, the CFO, who had been quiet for too long. "You, James," Portia said, her tone sharp. "I know how you've been cutting costs, pocketing your bonuses while cutting corners that hurt the people who actually do the work around here. What do you have to say for that?" James stiffened in his seat, but Portia could see the nervous flicker in his eyes. He was used to being in control of the numbers, of making the tough decisions that always seemed to benefit him. But now the game had changed. The people he had dismissed, the ones he had considered expendable, were now the ones with the power. "I've been doing what I thought was necessary for the company's bottom line," James stammered, his earlier confidence now shaken. "We've been facing financial pressure." "Financial pressure?" Portia interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "You've been making millions, while the people who actually make this company run get paid peanuts. And now, you want to talk about financial pressure?" She took a step closer to him, leaning over the table just slightly. "You've been pocketing millions while the rest of your staff has been struggling. I'm going to fix that, starting now." She turned her attention to Oliver, the operations manager, who had been sitting quietly, his arms crossed. Oliver had a reputation for being tough, for getting things done, but Portia knew he was just another cog in the machine, another man who thought his position was secure, even though the ground beneath him was shifting. "Portia, this is crazy," Oliver said, his voice gruff, trying to regain control of the situation. "You don't understand how things work at this level. This company's been running a certain way for decades. You can't just flip it on its head." Portia leaned forward slightly, her expression never wavering. "Actually, Oliver, I do understand how things work. You just don't like the way it's going to change. But I'm done with the old ways. This company is going to be built on respect, on fairness. We're going to take care of the people who make it run. And if you can't get behind that, then I'll find someone who will." Oliver didn't speak again, his face hardening into an unreadable mask. Portia turned her gaze to Richard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the exchange. He had always been the smooth talker, the one who spun grand tales of the company's success. But now, the man who was usually so adept at talking his way out of any situation looked visibly shaken. He had never been in a position where he wasn't the one holding all the power. "You," Portia said, locking eyes with Richard. "You've been selling this company's success as if it's some kind of fairy tale. But let's be honest here. You've been selling people on a lie. You've been peddling this narrative about how hard work leads to success. But that's only true for people at the top. The rest of us, we work hard and get overlooked, while you and your team cash in." Richard opened his mouth, but Portia held up a hand to silence him. "Don't bother, Richard," she said softly. "I've heard enough. Your job is to spin a story for the public, but the truth is going to come out now. Hamilton Industries isn't just a company. It's a community. And that's something you all clearly failed to understand." She took a step back from the table and looked at each of them, Nathan, James, Richard, Oliver, one by one. "You've all had your time to run this company. Now, I'm taking over, and from now on, the focus is going to shift. No more cutting corners, no more ignoring the people who make this place tick. We're going to reinvest in our people, our employees, and we're going to make sure they're paid what they're worth. Starting with the cleaning staff, the janitors, the people who have been invisible to you for so long." Nathan's face was a mask of frustration, but he said nothing. He was too stunned to respond. Portia could feel the power in the room shift even further as she spoke, as her words sank in. These men had no idea what it meant to truly care about the people behind the numbers. But Portia did. She had seen the sacrifices, the struggles, and now she was going to make sure their voices were heard. Portia turned to leave the boardroom, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she strode toward the door. But before she could step out, the young intern, the one who had smiled at her earlier, stepped forward hesitantly, as though she had something to say. "Ms. Williams," the intern said, her voice quiet but filled with awe. You're really going to change everything, aren't you?" Portia paused and turned to face her. There was a brief moment of silence before she smiled, a smile full of conviction and hope. "Yes," Portia said softly, "this is just the beginning." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and changes. Portia had expected pushback, but what she hadn't anticipated was the depth of the resistance. The old guard wasn't going to just step aside without a fight. But Portia had always known that the road to real power wasn't smooth. It was riddled with obstacles, each one designed to test her resolve. She was ready for all of them. Portia's first move as the new majority shareholder of Hamilton Industries was to call a company-wide meeting. It wasn't just for the executives, it was for everyone. She wanted the entire staff to hear from her, to understand that their voices mattered. For too long, the company had been run like a well-oiled machine, with the top executives reaping all the benefits while the workers beneath them struggled in silence. But that was about to change. As Portia entered the company's main conference room, she was met with a mix of reactions. The executives were all there, sitting stiffly at the table, their faces drawn and wary. They knew something big was coming, and none of them knew how to prepare for it. The rest of the staff, janitors, secretaries, and assistants were scattered around the room, looking nervous but hopeful. Portia had made sure to invite everyone from the cleaning staff to the executive assistants. She was about to show them all that they were no longer invisible. Portia took a deep breath, standing at the front of the room with her hands clasped in front of her. "Thank you all for joining me today," she began, her voice steady but firm. "I know that things have been a bit uncertain around here lately. I understand that you're all trying to figure out what comes next, especially after everything that's happened." Her eyes moved over the room, locking briefly with Nathan's. He was sitting at the far end of the table, arms crossed, his face dark with displeasure. But Portia wasn't fazed. He no longer had the power to intimidate her. "I'm not here to make empty promises," Portia continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I'm here to make real change. I want everyone in this room to understand that your work, your contributions, matter. This company has been built on your backs, and I'm going to make sure you get the respect and pay you deserve." There was a murmur of surprise from the staff, and even the executives looked taken aback. This was not the corporate speech they were used to hearing from the CEO. Nathan, who had always believed that success was about making tough, sometimes heartless decisions, was clearly struggling to keep his composure. "I've already begun the process of restructuring," Portia continued. "Starting today, we're going to implement a fair wage program for all employees. No more exploitation. No more cutting corners at the expense of the people who keep this company running. From now on, the people who do the work will be compensated for their value, and I'm not stopping there." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The room was still, but she could feel the tension in the air. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see how the other shoe would drop. "I know this won't be easy," Portia said, her voice dropping slightly. "There are systems in place that have been working for some people, but not for everyone. It's going to take time to change those systems. There will be mistakes, there will be resistance, but I will not back down. I'm not here to play your game. I'm here to change the rules." Nathan's chair creaked as he stood up abruptly. "You can't just—" "I already have," Portia interrupted, her tone firm. "The new policies are in place, Nathan. The contracts have been rewritten, and the financial reports are already being audited. You can fight this if you want, but it's over. The era of corporate greed ends today." Nathan's face twisted with anger, and for a moment, Portia thought he might try to storm out of the room. But he didn't. He was still calculating, still trying to figure out how to regain some semblance of control. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Portia was done listening. "I didn't come here to negotiate," she said, her voice cold. "I came here to fix what's broken." The room fell into silence again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. The executives who had once seen Portia as a mere cleaning lady now understood that they were facing a force that would not be intimidated. They could see it in her eyes. She was unyielding, determined, and unafraid. And the people who worked for her, those who had spent years in the shadows, were finally seeing her for who she truly was, their leader. The meeting dragged on for another hour as Portia outlined her plans for the company's future. She spoke of better benefits for the staff, a new focus on community involvement, and initiatives that would prioritize the health and well-being of every employee. But beneath the surface of her calm demeanor, Portia could feel the resistance starting to build. It wasn't just Nathan who was furious. The others, James, Richard, and Oliver, had their own ideas about how things should be run, and they weren't ready to let go of their power. As the meeting adjourned and the staff slowly filtered out of the room, Portia stayed behind, her gaze sweeping across the table. She could feel the weight of the decisions she had just made pressing on her shoulders. She knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more pushback, more attempts to undermine her. But Portia was ready. She had come from nothing. She had risen from the same places that so many of the people in this building had dismissed. And now it was her turn to shape the future. "Ms. Williams?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. Portia turned to see one of the cleaning staff members, the same intern who had spoken to her earlier, standing by the door, a timid smile on her face. "Yes?" Portia asked, her tone warm despite the weight of the meeting still pressing on her. "I just wanted to say thank you," the intern said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You're doing something that nobody's ever done before." Portia smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It's just the beginning," she said softly, "and you're a part of it." As the intern left, Portia took a deep breath, the sound of the building's HVAC system humming in the background. She had made her move, and now there was no going back. Hamilton Industries was hers to shape. The power was hers to wield, and nothing was going to stop her from making it the company she knew it could be. The days following the company-wide meeting were filled with a whirlwind of activity. Portia had expected resistance, but what she didn't anticipate was the sheer level of underhanded tactics some of the executives would resort to. Nathan and his colleagues, now facing a loss of control they couldn't ignore, were using every resource at their disposal to try and sabotage her. James, the CFO, tried to manipulate the company's financial reports, inflating costs and hiding profits to make it look as though Portia's initiatives were already sinking the company. Richard, the head of marketing, began circulating rumors among the staff, claiming that Portia's focus on employee welfare would eventually ruin the company's reputation. And Oliver, the operations manager, was doing everything he could to undermine Portia's decisions in front of the board, suggesting that her inexperience in running a company was causing irreparable damage. But Portia wasn't just going to sit back and let them tear down everything she had worked for. She knew their moves, she knew how they operated, and she had prepared for it. Her first step was to address the financial discrepancies James had tried to create. Portia called in the head of accounting, and after a thorough audit, she discovered that James had been diverting company funds into personal accounts under the guise of emergency reserves. She didn't hesitate. James was fired on the spot and escorted out of the building, his protests falling on deaf ears. The next morning, Portia addressed the entire company, making her intentions clear. She called an all-hands meeting where she spoke directly to the employees, those who had long been dismissed by the old guard. "We've had some disruptions recently," Portia began, her voice steady and firm as she looked out at the sea of faces. "But today marks a turning point for Hamilton Industries. From this moment on, we are a company that values fairness, respect, and hard work." She paused, her gaze shifting from the executives sitting stiffly at the table to the employees standing in the back, some of whom were janitors, secretaries, and assistants. They were the backbone of the company, and Portia was determined they would finally be treated as such. "We will no longer reward greed," she continued. "No more bonuses for the executives while the staff is left struggling. The workers here, the people who make this place run, will be compensated fairly, and that's just the beginning." The executives, including Nathan, sat quietly, their faces unreadable. They had been expecting a more diplomatic speech, but Portia wasn't here to play games. "I'm here to change the way we do business," she said. "For too long, the people at the top have reaped all the benefits, while those at the bottom have been invisible. But that ends now." The room fell silent, the employees exchanging looks of cautious hope. Nathan's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. He had underestimated Portia, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Portia wasn't finished. "We'll be implementing a new wage program for all employees," she added. "Fair pay, fair benefits, and no more ignoring the people who keep this company moving." A murmur of approval rippled through the room from the staff, while the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were starting to realize that Portia wasn't just a cleaner turned CEO, she was a force to be reckoned with. Nathan finally stood, his face flushed with anger. "You can't just make decisions like this without consulting us," he spat, his voice strained. "You have no experience in running this company." Portia's gaze never wavered. "I don't need experience in your way of running things," she replied, her voice cold and clear. "What I need is experience in seeing what's wrong with your system, and I've seen enough." Nathan's eyes flicked toward his colleagues, looking for support. But they were silent. He was on his own now. "This company belongs to the people who work here," Portia continued, her tone unwavering, "and we're going to make sure they get what they deserve." The executives sat stiffly, unwilling to say more in front of the employees. They could feel the power slipping from their hands, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. After the meeting, Portia returned to her office, where Tasha, her trusted assistant, was waiting for her with another stack of reports. Portia could see the concern on her face. "I've gone through the audit," Tasha said quietly, glancing at the papers in her hands. "There's something you need to see." Portia motioned for Tasha to sit. As she skimmed the documents, her heart sank. It wasn't just the financial discrepancies James had hidden, it was the scale of the corruption. Nathan, Richard, and the others had been siphoning money from the company in a way that went far beyond simple mismanagement. They had been embezzling funds, falsifying reports, and manipulating contracts to line their pockets while leaving the employees to fend for themselves. "This is bigger than I thought," Portia muttered, her fingers gripping the papers tightly. Tasha hesitated, her voice filled with concern. "Are you sure this is the right way? I mean, it's dangerous, Portia." Portia turned to her assistant, her eyes hardening with determination. "Dangerous? Tasha, these people have been running this company into the ground. They've been robbing the employees blind, and now it's time to expose them. I'm not backing down." "I get that," Tasha replied, her voice quiet. "But what if—" "No," Portia cut in, shaking her head. "We don't back down now. We expose them for who they are." The next day, Portia walked into the boardroom with the audit report in hand. She wasn't going to let Nathan or the others try to spin this into something they could cover up. It was time to put everything on the table. The room was tense, the air thick with the weight of what was coming. Portia placed the folder in front of Nathan, and he opened it, his face going pale as he skimmed the pages. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This," Portia said, her voice firm, "is proof of your corruption. You and your team have been stealing from this company for years, and now it's time to answer for it." Nathan's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, Portia thought he might lash out physically. But he held himself back, his hands trembling slightly as he closed the folder and glared at her. "You have no idea what you're doing," he spat. "You can't just—" "I already have," Portia interrupted, her voice cold. "It's over, Nathan. You're fired." The room went dead silent. There was no protest, no more attempts to defend his actions. Nathan, Richard, James, and Oliver, all of them had been caught. And now, Portia had the power to remove them from the company once and for all. Portia stood tall as the room began to clear, the weight of her victory settling over her. She had exposed the corruption, taken control, and in doing so, had cemented her place at the top. She had come from nothing, and now she was the one who would shape Hamilton Industries into something it had never been before. As she looked out over the Atlanta skyline, the sun setting behind the city's skyline, Portia knew that this was just the beginning. The days following the boardroom showdown were a blur. Portia's decision to expose Nathan and the others had sent shockwaves through Hamilton Industries, and the fallout was impossible to ignore. Media outlets picked up the story quickly, how a former janitor had taken control of one of the largest corporations in the region and ousted its corrupt leadership. The narrative quickly became one of corporate justice, and Portia was hailed as a symbol of empowerment, particularly among the employees who had long felt invisible. But while the world was celebrating her victory, Portia knew the real work was just beginning. Removing the old guard was only the first step. Rebuilding Hamilton Industries into the company she envisioned was going to take time, and there would be no shortage of resistance along the way. Portia had spent the past few days meeting with her new leadership team, people she could trust, who understood her vision. They were from various walks of life, some with corporate experience and others from outside the traditional business world. But they all shared one thing, a desire for real change. Portia knew the road ahead would be tough, but she had no intention of backing down. The first order of business was cleaning house. Portia made sure that every single one of the executives who had supported the corrupt system was let go. She brought in new leadership, people who understood what it meant to truly invest in the employees and the community. Her goal was simple: restore trust to a company that had long been a symbol of exploitation, and prove that businesses could thrive without sacrificing their people. As Portia walked through the halls of Hamilton Industries, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floors, she could feel the weight of the changes pressing down on her. The staff she passed were no longer walking with their heads down. There was a noticeable change in their posture, in their eyes. They were beginning to believe in her vision, and it fueled Portia's determination even more. But not everyone was on board. The transition had caused unrest in the company's higher echelons. Many of the middle managers and longtime employees who had benefited from the old system were unsure about Portia's new policies. She had made it clear that there would be no more hidden bonuses or behind-the-scenes deals, and some weren't ready to give up the perks they'd grown accustomed to. One afternoon, Portia was sitting in her office going over some reports when Tasha, her assistant, knocked on the door. "Ms. Williams," Tasha said, stepping inside with a folder in hand, "there's a situation I think you should know about." Portia looked up, raising an eyebrow. "What's going on?" "There's been a petition circulating," Tasha said, placing the folder on Portia's desk. "A group of senior managers are pushing back against your wage and benefits policies. They're saying it's going to cause the company to lose its competitive edge, and—" Tasha paused, clearly hesitant to continue. "They're saying you're making decisions without fully understanding the impact on the bottom line." Portia took the folder and skimmed through the contents. The petition had signatures from some of the company's most influential managers, people who had worked under Nathan and the others, people who still held power within the company. They were afraid of the changes she was making, afraid of losing their privileges. She set the folder down with a sigh, leaning back in her chair. "This was bound to happen," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The ones who are truly invested in this company, the ones who care about the people and not just the profits, they'll stand by us. The others?" She shook her head. "They'll have to choose whether they want to be a part of this or not." Tasha nodded, though there was still a look of concern on her face. "Are you planning to address it?" Portia paused for a moment, thinking. "Of course. We'll meet with them. But this isn't up for debate. The company is changing, and either they're with us or they're not." Later that afternoon, Portia called a meeting with the senior managers who had signed the petition. They sat stiffly around the conference table, their faces tense, unsure of what to expect. Portia walked into the room, her presence commanding and confident, her eyes scanning the room as she took a seat at the head of the table. "I understand that there are concerns about the changes I've made," Portia began, her voice steady and unwavering. "I also understand that some of you are not happy with the direction we're going. You've all been comfortable with the way things were run under Nathan, and you've benefited from that system. But that system is over." She let her words hang in the air before continuing. "What I'm building is a company that works for everyone, not just the executives. I'm rebuilding Hamilton Industries on a foundation of fairness and transparency. The people who make this company run the people who clean the floors, who answer the phones, who keep everything running, will be paid fairly, and they will have a voice. I'm done with a system that only rewards the people at the top." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room as the managers exchanged wary glances. One of them, a middle-aged man named Greg, spoke up. "Portia, I get it. We've been part of a broken system. But we also have to be realistic. The market's competitive. You can't just give everything away and expect this company to keep growing. We need to think about the bottom line." Portia didn't flinch. "And I'm doing that. But we're going to grow in a way that benefits the people who get us there. The employees at the bottom are just as important as those at the top, maybe more so. So if you can't get behind that, then maybe it's time to rethink where you belong in this company. The tension in the room was thick, but Portia didn't back down. She wasn't going to be swayed by fear. She had already sacrificed too much to let this chance slip away. She had fought for her place at the table, and now she was going to make sure the company reflected the values she believed in. The meeting lasted for over an hour, but in the end, Portia had made her point. Most of the senior managers reluctantly agreed to stand behind her vision, though Portia could tell that some of them were still uncertain. But she wasn't concerned with their doubts. She had the power now, and she was going to use it. As the meeting adjourned, Portia sat back in her chair, her hands folded in front of her. She felt the weight of the decisions ahead, but she also felt a growing sense of pride. She had taken on the system, fought back against the corruption, and now she was building something stronger. It wouldn't be easy, but Portia was no stranger to hard work, and she knew that if she kept pushing, Hamilton Industries would eventually be the company she had always known it could be. The weeks following the senior management meeting were a tense yet transformative period for Hamilton Industries. Portia's leadership had already begun to shift the company's culture, but old habits die hard. The remaining executives who had stayed loyal to Nathan's system were still holding on to their influence, even if they hadn't actively fought back since the meeting. It was becoming clear that Portia's battle wasn't just with those who had already been exposed, it was with the legacy of an entire corporate culture built on exploitation and inequality. Portia wasn't just taking down corrupt executives, she was fighting to dismantle the very systems that had kept power concentrated at the top for decades. She knew the road ahead would be rocky, but she wasn't afraid of the challenge. She had spent years fighting for a seat at the table. Now she was going to make sure that seat was one of substance, not just show. It was late one evening when Portia received a call from her legal team. They had just finished reviewing the company's new policies and were concerned about potential legal challenges. With the changes Portia had implemented, the pay raises, the benefits for all employees, the overhaul of the corporate structure, there were risks involved. Some of the company's former shareholders were unhappy with how Portia had handled the buyout, and there were whispers that they might take legal action. "I thought we were clear on this," Portia said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "The policies are non-negotiable." "We're not saying the policies aren't solid," her lead counsel Tom responded, "but some of the shareholders are going to fight back. They're questioning whether you had the legal right to do what you did. You've already made some enemies, and now they're going to fight to protect their interests." Portia leaned back in her chair, the city lights of Atlanta flickering outside her office window. She had known this day would come. In fact, she had planned for it. The old shareholders, those who had profited off the backs of the employees, were never going to go quietly. But Portia wasn't in this to placate people who had never given a second thought to the workers who had made Hamilton Industries successful. "Let them fight," Portia said quietly. "I'm not here to play by their rules. I'm here to change the game." The next morning, Portia called an emergency board meeting. The legal team had recommended gathering the remaining key executives and major stakeholders to discuss the legal challenges and prepare for potential fallout. But Portia had a different plan. This wasn't going to be another meeting where the old power players tried to make backroom deals. This was going to be a chance for her to lay down the law, once and for all. As the board members filed into the conference room, Portia stood at the head of the table, her posture poised and confident. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had spent so long getting here, but now she had to prove that she wasn't just the right person to lead Hamilton Industries. She had to prove that she was the only person who could. "Thank you for joining me on short notice," Portia began, her voice cool and steady. "I'm sure you're all aware of the legal challenges we're facing, and I'm sure some of you are wondering what the next steps will be. But let me make one thing clear. I am not here to apologize for the changes I've made. I'm not here to compromise." She glanced around the table, locking eyes with the few remaining executives who had once been part of Nathan's inner circle. They were starting to look uneasy, their discomfort noticeable. "I've spent years building a vision for this company," Portia continued. "A vision that doesn't just benefit the elite at the top. A vision where the people who make this company run, who have always made this company run, are given the respect and compensation they deserve. And that is not negotiable." One of the senior executives, an older man named Harold, who had been a longtime ally of Nathan's, cleared his throat. "Portia, I understand your passion, but there are concerns. These changes are drastic. We're talking about changing the entire structure of the company, not just the wages, but the way we've done business for decades. This isn't something we can just push through without consequences. I'm aware of the consequences, Portia replied, her tone unwavering. But the real question is, what kind of company do we want to be? Do we want to be a company that continues to take advantage of people, to exploit them for the benefit of a few? Or do we want to be a company that stands for fairness, accountability, and respect for everyone, no matter their role? Harold looked around the table at the other executives. Some were nodding, but others seemed uncertain. Portia could sense the divide growing. Some of them were bought into her vision, while others were still holding on to the old way of doing things. The question wasn't just whether they would challenge her, it was whether they could truly accept the changes she was bringing. "I've made up my mind," Portia said, her voice firm. "We are going to stand behind these changes, and we're going to fight for them. If any of you are unwilling to back that, then maybe this company isn't the right place for you." There was a long silence as the room took in Portia's words. For a moment, it seemed like everything hung in the balance. But then, to Portia's surprise, one of the board members, a young woman named Monica, who had been with the company for years, spoke up. "I'm with you, Portia," Monica said, her voice strong. "I've seen what this company has done to the people who work here, and it's wrong. It's time for change. I'm in." A few others followed suit, offering their support. One by one, the majority of the board members stood with Portia. They were ready for the new direction she was taking, ready to embrace the vision of a company that valued people over profits. Harold remained silent for a few moments before finally speaking. "I'm not sure this is the right move for the company," he said, his voice low, "but I respect your decision, and I'll step aside if that's what's needed." Portia nodded. "Thank you, Harold. I respect your honesty. And I hope you'll support the future we're building here, even if you're not on board with all the changes." The meeting adjourned shortly after, but Portia knew that the battle wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more people who would try to tear down what she was building, but she was ready. She had fought too hard to let anything stand in her way. As the board members filed out of the room, Portia stayed behind for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She had won this round, but the real work was just beginning. She had to continue proving that her vision for Hamilton Industries wasn't just a dream, it was the future. And she wasn't about to let anyone take that from her. In the weeks following Portia's decision to implement sweeping changes at Hamilton Industries, the company began to shift in ways that were impossible to ignore. The building, which once felt like a cold corporate fortress, now hummed with a different kind of energy. Employees who had once walked with their heads down now carried themselves with newfound pride. The janitors, the secretaries, the assistants, all those who had been invisible in the old regime, were starting to feel seen. Portia had turned Hamilton Industries into more than just a company. It was becoming a community. But despite the positive changes, the journey wasn't without its struggles. As much as Portia had anticipated resistance from the old guard, she hadn't fully prepared for how ingrained the company's corporate culture was. Many of the longtime employees, those who had worked their way up the ladder during Nathan's reign, still clung to the old ways. They had benefited from the system that Portia was now dismantling, and change wasn't something they embraced easily. One afternoon, Portia sat in her office, reviewing the latest round of feedback from the staff. The reports were full of optimism and gratitude from those who had been long overlooked. But there was a section toward the end that caught her attention. A report from one of the middle managers, detailing concerns from several employees about the new direction. They weren't questioning the pay raises or the benefits, they were questioning Portia's approach to leadership. They wanted to know if she was truly committed to the company's long-term success, or if this was all just a reaction to the old regime. Portia leaned back in her chair, reading the feedback again. She could hear the undertone of doubt in their words, the uncertainty that came from years of being told one thing and then seeing everything change in a matter of months. She had expected this. Change was never easy, especially when it came to dismantling a system that had been built over decades. But Portia wasn't afraid of the challenge. She'd faced worse obstacles, had fought harder battles than these lingering doubts. The question wasn't whether she could make these changes stick. The question was whether she could convince everyone around her that Hamilton Industries had a future worth fighting for. That evening, Portia called a meeting with the senior leadership team. It was time to address the concerns directly. No more hiding behind reports or secondhand feedback. She was going to get to the heart of what was really happening inside her company. As the team filed into the conference room, Portia could feel the weight of the situation. Some of them still looked at her with skepticism, unsure if she was really cut out for the top job. They had seen Nathan run the company with an iron fist, and now they were watching Portia, an outsider, in their eyes try to bring about a revolution. The room felt heavy with unspoken tension. "I've read the feedback," Portia began, her voice steady but commanding. "I know there are concerns about the direction we're taking. I understand that change isn't easy, but I'm not here to just make decisions based on what's comfortable. I'm here to build a company where every person's worth is recognized and rewarded." She looked around the table, locking eyes with each person. "I didn't come here to change things for the sake of change. I came here because I believe Hamilton Industries can be something better, something stronger, and I need all of you to believe that too. I need you to show the employees that we're all in this together." There was a moment of silence as the leaders around the table exchanged glances. Finally, Monica, the young woman who had been one of the first to support Portia, spoke up. "I've seen it in the employees," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "They're excited about the changes, Portia. They feel heard for the first time. They're starting to believe in what you're doing here. But it's not just the staff. Some of the senior managers are still holding on to the old ways. We can't ignore that." Portia nodded. She had known that the real test would come from the top, those who had benefited from the old system and weren't ready to let go of their power. But she wasn't about to let them derail everything she had worked for. "If they can't get on board," Portia said firmly, "then they don't belong here." There was a pause as the room absorbed her words. Portia could feel the energy shift as the senior leaders began to understand the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just asking for their support, she was demanding it. "We're going to have to make some tough calls," she continued, "but we're in this together. We're rebuilding this company on the foundation of respect, accountability, and hard work, and I won't back down from that." The meeting continued for hours, with Portia and her team discussing next steps, addressing concerns, and outlining a new set of company-wide initiatives. It was clear that the work ahead was going to require all of them to be united, to be on the same page. And as the meeting came to a close, Portia felt a sense of determination wash over her. She wasn't just leading a company, she was leading a movement. The next day, Portia called for another round of meetings, this time with the employees. She wanted them to hear directly from her, to understand that the changes were not just corporate decisions, they were personal ones. She was fighting for them, and she needed them to fight for the company too. The employees were skeptical at first, unsure if the company's promises of fairness and respect would truly be realized. But as Portia spoke, she could see the shift in their attitudes. She spoke not just as their CEO, but as someone who had walked the same path they had. She told them about her mother, about how she had grown up watching women like her struggle, never getting the recognition they deserved, and she told them that the only way to change the system was to take control of it. "Hamilton Industries isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet," Portia said, her voice strong and clear. "It's about the people who make this place run, and it's about time we all got the credit we deserve." By the end of the day, the mood had shifted. The employees were talking to each other, discussing the changes, feeling a sense of hope they hadn't felt before. They were starting to believe in Portia, in the new Hamilton Industries. As Portia left the meeting, she paused for a moment in the hallway. The building felt different now. It wasn't just a corporate machine anymore. It was a place where people cared about each other, where their work was valued. She had done what she set out to do, and though there was still much work ahead, Portia knew she was on the right path. The company was changing, and so was she. As we reflect on Portia Williams' powerful journey from invisibility to leadership, let this story remind us that resilience and vision can change not only lives, but entire systems. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more empowering stories that celebrate courage, strategy, and determination. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear how this story inspires you.